I already signed the divorce papers, Marcus. I'm done.
That's fine. Just remember, you're leaving the man you never bothered to know.
My attorney messengered those over yesterday. I've already signed my sections. That was how she said it. Not sitting across from me. Not looking at me. Standing at the kitchen counter with her back turned, pouring coffee like she was reading from a grocery list. The folder was already on the counter when I came downstairs. Divorce petition. Property settlement. Parenting plan with Brianna's name printed in the header in clean, indifferent font. The ceramic bowl my mother had given us as a wedding gift was gone from the shelf where it had lived for 11 years. The framed print we bought together at a street market in Savannah the summer Brianna turned 9 was gone from the wall. The space where it had hung was a slightly different shade from the paint around it. A pale rectangle that looked like a room remembering something it no longer had. She had packed what she wanted before she told me what she had decided. Jerome Ballard was seated at my kitchen table with a leather portfolio open in front of him like he had arrived for a meeting. And someone forgot to clear the breakfast dishes. He was the kind of man who wore his watch on the outside of his shirt cuff, so the natural movement of his arm revealed it. Casual. Inevitable. As though you were only now noticing what had always been there. He did not stand when I came in. Simone's cousin Renata stood near the hallway with her arms folded, wearing the expression of a woman attending an event she had organized in her own mind years before the invitations went out. I picked up the folder. I was still reading the first page when I heard the front door open. Brianna, home early from track practice, still in her uniform, water bottle in both hands, stopping just inside the doorway because the room she had walked into was not the room she had left that morning. She looked at Jerome. She looked at Renata. She looked at her mother's back. Then she looked at me. I watched her understand what the folder in my hands was. I watched it move across her face the way weather moves. Fast, specific, gone before most people would have caught it. She set her water bottle down on the bottom step of the stairs. Very carefully, like she was setting down something she did not want to break. Then she walked back upstairs without a word. I understood two things simultaneously. Simone had planned this morning before today, and Brianna had known it was coming before I did. Carrying that knowledge alone in the silence of a teenager who understands that some information cannot be returned once it is shared. Simone finally turned from the counter. It's straightforward. The attorneys made sure of that. I looked at her. Then at Jerome, turning a page in his portfolio with the comfort of a man who has been in this kitchen before. Then at Renata, steady and composed, confident in how this ended. I picked up the pen. Signed where the tabs indicated. Set it down. Then I went upstairs and knocked on Brianna's door. She was sitting on the edge of her bed with her track spikes still on, looking at a photograph on her nightstand. The three of us at the coast 5 summers back. She was 12, missing her front teeth, laughing at something off camera I could no longer remember. Simone was looking at the camera. I was looking at Brianna. You sat beside her. Neither of us said anything for a while. She planned this for a long time, didn't she? It wasn't a question. Yes. I think she did. Did you know? Not until recently. She nodded. Looked at her spikes. Are we going to be okay? I put my hand over hers. You and I are going to be more than okay. That I can promise you exactly. She leaned her head against my shoulder for a moment. Then she sat up and said she needed to shower. On her nightstand beside the photograph was a folded piece of paper with Simone's handwriting on the outside. Whatever was written inside had not been enough to do what a conversation should have done. Brianna had kept it anyway, the way you keep evidence of something you are still deciding how to feel about. I left it where it was. That was her process. I had no business being inside it. If you have ever stood in a room where someone looked directly at you and decided you were replaceable, this story is for you. What follows is not about how Marcus dismantled anyone. It is not a revenge story, though people will reach for that word because they need a category for what happens when a quietly powerful man stops absorbing other people's assumptions. It is a story about what was always true, and about the particular cost of being certain when you are wrong about the most important thing. My name is Marcus Ellington Beaumont. I am the majority controlling interest behind a private holding group managing assets across infrastructure, logistics, commercial real estate, and renewable energy in 14 states. My net worth at the time Simone left that folder on the counter was approximately $49 billion. She did not know that. Nobody in my personal life did, with 3 exceptions. My lead attorney, my chief financial officer, and my grandfather, Cornelius Beaumont, who had been dead for 11 years, but whose decisions were the first chapter of everything I had built. Cornelius was born in 1931 in a county where the courthouse still had separate water fountains when he was a grown man with children of his own. He worked 30 years in manufacturing, saved with a discipline his co-workers found excessive and his wife understood was intentional, and in 1967 used those savings and a private loan from a black-owned credit union to purchase 61 acres of commercially zoned land that nobody with institutional money was paying attention to yet. The county recorder processed the deed without hospitality. Cornelius paid his property taxes every year in person, in cash, and kept the receipts in a fireproof lockbox under the floorboards of his bedroom closet. He told me when I was 22, 3 weeks before he died. Lying in the hospital bed, they had moved to the front room, so he could see the yard. He told me the land wasn't money yet, but would become money if I was patient enough not to rush it and honest enough not to misuse it. He told me one other thing. Son, the moment a person needs to inspect your balance sheet before deciding you deserve their respect, you've already received the only information about them that will ever matter. File it. And keep moving. I filed it. I kept moving. Over the years that followed, I sold 2 parcels at valuations reflecting what the market had become rather than what Cornelius had paid. The proceeds became operating capital for my first acquisition. A regional logistics company with sound infrastructure and broken management. I fixed the management, held it 4 years, and sold it at a return that made every subsequent acquisition easier to fund. I moved into warehousing, then fiber infrastructure, then commercial real estate built around undervalued industrial corridors that larger institutional players consistently overlooked. Every asset sat inside a holding structure established with legal precision. Before I ever sat across from Simone at a dinner a mutual friend arranged. Premarital. Properly documented. Transparent to courts. Invisible to everyone else. I drove an unremarkable vehicle. I wore plain clothes. I coached Brianna's youth basketball team. And sat in the bleachers at her track meets talking with other parents about recruiting timelines and summer conditioning. Nobody asked what I did in specifics because nothing about me suggested specifics would be interesting. That was a choice. Made once. Revisited regularly. Always reaffirmed. I had watched money arrive inside my extended family without preparation. And watched what it did to people who had genuinely loved each other before it appeared. How it introduced a new accounting between them. Who gave more, who was owed more. How it made generous people precise and territorial in ways that surprised even themselves. I wanted none of that in the family I was building. The life you live should be enough. If it requires a number to justify it, something was already wrong before the number appeared. By the time Simone was telling Renata, she wasn't sure Marcus had ever really applied himself. My assets had already exceeded $49 billion. Simone's disillusionment did not arrive as an event. It arrived as weather. Gradual, cumulative, nearly impossible to name while it was happening and entirely obvious in retrospect. It came through years of watching people she admired perform their success publicly, and wondering why the man across from her at dinner never performed his. Through evenings where other men spoke about acquisitions in the language of men who needed the room to register what they had accomplished, and where I said little because I had never needed the room to register anything. It came through Renata, who had formed an early conclusion about me, and never once updated it despite having no real information to support it. She told Simone my quietness was not depth, it was ceiling. That a man without visible ambition was a man without real ambition. That Simone was too bright and too capable to spend her best years beside someone who would look exactly the same in 10 years as he did today. Year by year, in the patient way water reshapes stone. What Renata said became the lens through which Simone saw me. Jerome Ballard entered the picture 14 months before the folder appeared on the counter. A commercial developer with the polish of a man who understood that presentation was its own form of capital. Exactly the kind of man Renata had been gesturing toward for years without being able to name him specifically. Simone told me directly one evening in the living room. Composed. rehearsed, relieved to finally deliver it out loud. She wanted a different life. She had concluded I was not the person to build it with her. Jerome was. Renata, within earshot, said nothing. She didn't need to. She had already said everything that mattered over the preceding decade. During the divorce proceedings, my attorneys managed the financial disclosure with the thoroughness the law required. Every holding structure documented. Every asset clearly identified as premarital property established years before the marriage began. Simone's attorney reviewed the filings and raised no substantive challenge, because no irregularity existed. What Simone concluded was that Marcus did not have significant assets worth contesting. I did not correct that conclusion. I moved into a house on the west side of the city within a week of the settlement. Quiet property. Mature trees. Nothing announcing itself from the street. Brianna came with me. She had asked to, with the practicality of a 17-year-old, who has assessed a situation clearly and made a decision she intends to stand behind. Her first evening she sat at the kitchen island while I made dinner and said, "Jerome asked Mom if he could convert your office into a home gym." I kept cutting. What did she say? She said yes before he finished asking. I put down the knife and looked at her. She was watching me with the expression she had been developing for months. Careful. Measuring. Trying to determine whether I was genuinely okay, or performing okay for her benefit. "I'm fine, Bri." "I know you are," she said. "I just wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it somewhere else." She had been doing that for months. Delivering information gently, in advance, so I could absorb it privately rather than in public. Protecting me from ambush. She was 17 years old. I made a quiet decision that I would find the right time to set something in front of my daughter that would make the weight she had been carrying make sense. Not yet. But soon. What neither of us knew during those first weeks was the actual condition of Jerome Ballard's financial life. He had been pursuing a large-scale infrastructure and commercial development project for months. Significant capital requirements. The kind of transaction, he told Simone, that would establish his name in the industry for a generation. The equity capital was controlled by a private infrastructure fund. Jerome told Simone the commission alone would remove every financial constraint from their life and give her the future she had chosen him for. What Jerome had not shared was the structure of his actual balance sheet. He was carrying substantial obligations from 3 previous projects that had not performed as represented. He had been managing this exposure through forward momentum, keeping the architecture upright through the rotation of incoming capital and the confidence to make creditors believe the correction was perpetually imminent. The funds Simone had contributed, money she believed was going toward deal preparation costs and preliminary deposits, had not gone to any of those purposes. It had gone to creditors. She was not his partner in this transaction. She was his bridge financing. She had no idea. The private infrastructure fund Jerome was presenting to was managed through a subsidiary of Cornelius Group Holdings. My grandfather's name, my deliberate choice, made the day I registered the entity, to put the name of the man who started everything on the door of the thing that carried it forward. The final investment decision rested with me. My team flagged Jerome's submission during standard due diligence. Revenue projections that failed to reconcile with the operating histories he cited. Collateral appearing in overlapping filings simultaneously. A disclosed debt schedule bearing no relationship to the liability structure. My analysts found one layer beneath the surface. When the forensic review went deeper, it found the movement of Simone's funds. The capital she believed had been deployed into legitimate deal infrastructure had been routed to creditors with no connection to this project. There was no investment being constructed. There was a deficit being temporarily covered with her money, while Jerome waited for a commission large enough to repay what he had taken before she discovered it had been taken. I read the complete report on a Thursday evening, and sat with it for a long time. Not because I was uncertain about what it meant, because I was deciding what kind of man I was going to be in the room where this report became consequential. I thought about Cornelius. What he would have done with this information and this opportunity. He would have done exactly what needed to be done. Nothing more. I called my general counsel. Jerome arrived the morning of the presentation in a suit that communicated his relationship with other people's perception of him. Simone was with him. Dressed carefully. The kind of careful that belongs to a morning a person has decided matters more than ordinary ones. She walked through the lobby with the settled composure of a woman who has already written the next chapter, and is present only for the formality of events catching up to what she has decided. They were shown to the main conference room on the executive floor. The room was already occupied. My general counsel, the fund's chief operating officer, 2 members of the investment committee, a forensic accounting associate whose presence Jerome would not yet understand. The chair at the head of the table was empty. The door opened. I walked in with my COO on my left and my general counsel on my right, and the senior team behind me. Every person already seated rose with the automatic unperformed recognition of people who understand where authority actually lives. Good morning, Mr. Beaumont. On the display screen at the front of the room, the standard ownership summary was already visible. Cornelius Group Holdings. Founder and controlling chairman, Marcus Ellington Beaumont. Portfolio valuation, $49.1 billion. Jerome's face moved through several things in a short period of time. Simone said my name. Once. Quietly. Like a word she had just discovered she did not fully know the meaning of. I sat at the head of the table. Let the room be what it was for one moment without filling it with anything. Then I opened the review file and did my job. I walked Jerome's team through the due diligence findings precisely, and without theater. The revenue misrepresentations. The collateral duplications. The liability structure that corresponded to a financial reality entirely different from what he had submitted. And then I came to Simone's funds. I stated where they had gone. Directly. In the language of documented fact rather than personal accusation. Because fact was sufficient and accusation was not my function in this room. I stated it in full because Simone was sitting 8 feet away, and she deserved to hear the truth said plainly by someone with the documentation to support every word of it, rather than find it later in pieces from people with their own interests in how she received it. Jerome did not speak while I went through it. Simone sat with her hands flat on the table. I declined the investment. The submission had failed to meet the fund's foundational standards of financial accuracy and disclosure integrity. That was the reason. Complete. Sufficient. Requiring nothing additional. The meeting closed in 38 minutes. In the weeks that followed, Jerome's position came apart in the way that structures built on forward momentum come apart when the momentum stops. His primary creditors called in their obligations. The deal did not close because it had never been real in the way he had represented it. What Simone discovered as those weeks unfolded was that almost nothing Jerome had shown her about his financial life was accurate. The assets he had gestured toward were encumbered, misrepresented, or non-existent. The collateral she had committed was exposed. The funds she had contributed were largely unrecoverable. He began disappearing the way people disappear when they have run out of forward motion. Incrementally. Always one more delay. Always the same confidence right up until the confidence itself became the clearest signal that something was wrong. Renata was unavailable for the conversations that required accountability. She had the instincts of someone who recognizes when a position has become costly to hold, and applied those instincts to her own cousin with a thoroughness that said more about her character than anything she had ever said about mine. She had meant well. She couldn't have known. She had access to everything she needed to know about Jerome Ballard. She had simply never looked. Simone called me several weeks later and asked if she could come by. I said yes. She arrived on a Saturday morning and stood in the entry of my house looking at the rooms the way a person looks when they are recalibrating their understanding of a significant period of their own life. Not reading the space for what it said about wealth. Reading it for what it said about the man she had been living beside for 19 years. And believed she understood completely. She sat across from me, composed in the technical sense, prepared. She had a version of the story organized, one in which incomplete information had shaped her choices, one in which my silence was a form of withholding that made her decisions reasonable under the circumstances. She said she hadn't known what she was working with. I said she had known exactly who she was working with. The $49 billion was information she hadn't had. The man had been in front of her every day for 19 years. She said that wasn't a fair distinction. I said I wasn't drawing it to be fair or unfair. I was drawing it because it was accurate. Then she asked why I had never told her. Across 19 years of mornings and dinners and ordinary evenings, and the specific intimacy of a life shared closely with another person. Because the moment I told you, I said, we would have spent the rest of our marriage answering the wrong question. Which question? Whether you were with me, or with what I represented. The composure she had carried through my front door began to give way. Not suddenly. The way something gives way when the single point it has been resting on is quietly and completely removed. Then she apologized. It was a long apology because she had a great deal of actual ground to cover, and she covered it without shortcuts. The affair. Filing for divorce without a single honest conversation between us first. Years of sitting across from Renata, while a verdict on my character was assembled, and never once asking me whether any part of it was accurate. Remaking our home around Jerome before she had finished remaking herself. And then Brianna. She came to Brianna last, and it cost her more than all the rest combined. Her voice changed register. Her hands went still. She said she knew what Brianna had been carrying. She said she didn't know yet how to account for it fully, but that she understood it belonged to her, and not to anyone else in this story. When she finished, she looked at me. Is there any part of what we had that you could find your way back to? With me. I told her I had no intention of diminishing her life, or making her circumstances smaller than they needed to be. I told her Brianna's relationship with her was entirely Brianna's to determine, and I would support whatever she chose without interference. I told her she would not be left without a foundation, because that was right regardless of everything that had passed between us. Then I told her no. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I said, the morning you stood at that counter and slid that folder across without turning around, you weren't leaving a man who hadn't become enough. You were leaving a man you had decided wasn't worth the question. Those are two different things. And I can't go back to a marriage where the second one was possible. Then I walked to the bookshelf along the wall. On the second shelf, held upright between two books, was a folded sheet of paper. Track meet results. Brianna's times from the regional qualifier 2 months earlier. The best race of her season. She had left it on my desk that same evening without a note, without explanation. Just the paper placed where she knew I would find it. I looked at it for a moment, then turned back to Simone. She ran a personal record that day, I said. She looked for both of us when she crossed the line. She found me first because I was in my usual seat. She looked for you for a while before she found you, because you had moved. She didn't say anything about it afterward. She just got her warm-up jacket and came to find me. Simone stood very still. That's not an accusation. That's just what happened. She pressed one hand briefly to her mouth. Then she walked to the door, stopped with her back to me, hand resting on the frame. She decided not to say whatever she had considered saying. She left. I stood in the quiet of the front room for a while, then went upstairs to find Brianna, who was in her room with headphones on, not quite convincingly pretending she had not heard a car in the driveway. I knocked. She pulled one side off. Was that Mom? Yes. She studied my face with the precision she had been applying to it for months. Are you okay? Yeah. I'm okay. One more moment of reading. Then she put the headphone back. On her desk, held flat under her water bottle, was the piece of paper with Simone's handwriting. Unfolded now. She had read it. Left it on the desk rather than putting it away, which meant she was still deciding what it was and what it deserved from her. I left it where it was. 6 weeks later, I told Brianna I had a meeting downtown, and asked if she wanted to come. She said yes without asking where. She didn't bring her phone. We parked in the structure adjacent to the building and walked to the entrance in the early quiet of a Tuesday morning. Brianna noticed the security officer's posture change the moment we came through the doors. Not the procedural alertness of lobby staff managing foot traffic. The involuntary kind. The kind that happens in the body before the mind has issued an instruction. She noticed it and said nothing. A building manager appeared before we reached the elevator bank. Greeted me by name. Walked us to the private car without being asked. 2 senior staff members paused a conversation entirely when we passed, and waited until we were beyond them to resume. The button for the top floor was not in the section available to general occupants. The building manager entered a code. The car moved. Brianna looked straight ahead. The doors opened on the executive floor. Long hallway. Floor-to-ceiling glass along the east side with the city laid out below in the morning light. At the far end, in front of the main conference room doors, the Cornelius Group Holdings logo in quiet permanent letters. The senior leadership team was assembled in the hallway. Not for a meeting. For the chairman. Brianna walked the length of that hallway beside me and did not say a word. She looked at the logo. She looked at the people. She looked at the way the space organized itself around our arrival without anyone being asked to make it do that. Inside the conference room I asked for 20 minutes. The team stepped out. I sat across from my daughter at a table built for 30 people and told her everything. Cornelius and the 61 acres. The fireproof lockbox under the floorboards. The first acquisition and everything that followed. The holding structure established before I ever sat across from her mother. The number. $49 billion. Said plainly. Without building toward it. Without performance. Because it deserved to be said that way and not any other. Brianna listened completely. No interruptions. Not rearranging her face into whatever expression she thought the moment required. When I finished she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for since the morning we left. Why did you let them treat you like you had nothing? Because pulling out a balance sheet to make someone treat me with dignity, I said, is not dignity. It is a transaction. And I have never been willing to transact for something that should have been freely given. She sat with that. Worked through it without rushing toward a conclusion she hadn't earned yet. Then she looked at the logo visible through the conference room glass. His name. On the door of everything that came after him. Granddaddy Cornelius figured that out before you did. Yes, I said. He did. Does Mom know everything now? She knows enough. Is she going to be okay? No anger in the question. No satisfaction. She asked it the way she asked things she genuinely wanted answered. Yes. She's going to be okay. Brianna nodded once. Picked up the legal pad in front of her. Looked toward the door. Can we bring them back in? I have questions about the infrastructure portfolio. The team came back in. She asked 4 questions in the first 20 minutes. Precise, direct questions that located the actual center of a subject without circling it. The COO answered 2 of them, and then on the third looked at her with the specific recalibration that happens when a person realizes they have been underestimating who they are sitting across from. He did not make that mistake on the 4th question. Afterward in the hallway with the city spread below us through the glass, Brianna stood quietly for a while. He never got to see any of this. Granddaddy Cornelius. No, I said. He didn't. But he knew it was coming. I thought about a man lying in a bed moved to the front room so he could see his yard. Handing me the most important thing he owned, not in a lockbox but in a sentence. Yes. I believe he did. She looked at the city for another moment. Then it still counts. He still built this. Even without ever standing here. It still counts. I did not say anything. Because she had said the right thing and adding to it would only have made it smaller. Then she tucked the legal pad under her arm and walked toward the elevator with the stride of someone who understands exactly where they are and is not surprised to be there. I followed her. For the first time in a long time I was following someone else's lead. It felt exactly right. This story was never about the money. It was about a man who understood the difference between his worth and his wealth, and refused at every point where it would have been easy to confuse the two to let anyone else determine which one mattered. It was about a girl who set her water bottle down carefully on the bottom step, because she did not want to break anything, who delivered bad news gently so her father would not be ambushed by it, who asked whether her mother was going to be okay on the same day she learned the full shape of what her mother had done. That girl is the real inheritance. Not the 49 billion. Not the buildings. Not the name above the door of a company built on land a black man purchased in 1967 when the county recorder processed the deed without hospitality. The real inheritance is the understanding that your value is not assigned in the rooms where people have already decided what you are. It was established before you walked in. It will remain after you leave. It does not require their recognition to exist, and it does not diminish in their absence. Cornelius knew it. Marcus learned it. Brianna inherited it. If you are here right now having been looked past or counted out or handed back a version of yourself smaller than the truth, You already know which part of this story belongs to you. Share this today with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn your notifications on. Quiet strength is still strength. Being underestimated is not the same as being diminished. You are the author of your story. We will see you in the next one.